Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and this video we're breaking down Andor Season 2. The series is now at an end, and there's lots of things to take from the finale of the show. There's despair, anger, happiness and hope, and it's just an emotional send-off for a lot of the characters. Throughout this video, we'll be reviewing the ending and also discussing how it ties in with Rogue One. If you enjoy it, please hit the thumbs up and make sure you subscribe for videos like this every week. We have subscribers everywhere. With that out of the way though, thank you for clicking this, and may the Force be with you, and also with you.
Jeddah, Kyber Crystal and ISB Morgan. Luthen dying to get us in motion. Now Tivik keeps calling us.
Okay, so come the end of Andor, we see our characters receiving lots of different fates. Luthen and Cyril are dead, and Dedras locked up in prison. This is the same place Andor was sentenced to in Season 1, and it just feels like an apt place for a character to end up. Saw Gerrera is also currently on Jeddah, and we see him looking out the window from Rogue One. Off in the distance is the city of Jeddah, and the Star Destroyer stripping the Kyber. This was the place that he died, and it's where he stood before being hit by the horizon.
There's no horizon.
Krennic's also looking out on his work and staring at that empty Death Star dish. It reminded me heavily of the ending of Revenge of the Sith, where we saw a newly named Darth Vader and Palpatine looking out at the Death Star being built. Now though Rogue One begins with him arriving to get Galen, technically this shot continues in his reintroduction in Rogue One. What I mean by that is that the start of the movie is a flashback, and then we rejoin him meeting with Tarkin on the Death Star, which happens immediately after this moment. The pair then watch the dish being lowered in, and it's off to Jeddah to prepare for the test. Mothma also ends up on Yavin 4, and during Rebels, we actually saw where she was smuggled by the Ghost crew. Arguing with Saw, this explains why she needed Jyn to approach him in Rogue One. He talks about how she needs to stop sending her lackeys, and that she has to go with a personal touch. Saw then passed on the message from her father to her, and then the rest of the movie played out. Now, as for Andor and Bix, well, they've had a really tough time. Bix ended up leaving him because she knew how important he was to the galaxy. He was a key cog that could bring the Empire down. She sacrificed a happy future with her family so that he could go and sacrifice himself. This is so that she and their child could have a happy life, which is the shot we close on. It still gets to me. She promises that when it's over they can do all the things they've missed out on, but Andor ends up paying the ultimate price and costs so that they can have a better life. In the show, we watch as he heads out to his U-Wing and then flies off from Yavin 4. This is the ship from the film, and he's accompanied by K2SO. As we hear, they're going to the Ring of Catherine, which is actually where we begin with him in Rogue One. So it ties them neatly together, and he gets to go off and have his happy end. Oh god, they're all gonna get nuked. Either way, I think that final shot of their child and Bix is really symbolic, and it sums up exactly what Cassian died for. He was a character fighting for hope and so that the future could live. Throughout the series, he's described as a messenger and even gets called that by a Force healer. Though he brushed this off, it actually set up the character's purpose. We get a shot of her in the montage, and it feels like it's building off that. Just before Andor goes, Bail Organa parts ways with the classic, "May the Force be with you." In episode 7, we see how Andor doesn't just believe this Force healing mumbo jumbo, but the healer takes an interest in him, and this line just kind of hammers that home. I think it also helps to cement that Andor's always in the right place due to the Force. On the Backstory Magazine podcast, Dan Gilroy talked about how this interaction with Cassian changed the character.
How did you arrive on the Force healer talking and defining him as a messenger?
That was in Tony's outline, and I was really glad he put it in there because that's pretty definitive, because she's saying something that I believe is true, that he's an apostle, you know, he's not spreading the word, he's spreading the revolution that's going to turn into the war. But look, you study the Bible, so many of the apostles had no belief whatsoever in anything that was going on. They were along for the ride, many of the apostles. I mean, a couple of them that were too zealous, but many of the apostles were just, you know, I'll betray him. This is crazy. I don't want to be part of what's going on. This is dangerous. So I always saw him as an apostle. I think just like in the Bible, after Jesus rises, you know, in that story, a lot of the apostles became true believers after that. I always imagined after when I was writing the scene that when Cassian encounters the faith healer, that afterward it lands with him. And I believe when he's on the beach dying, I believe somewhere in his head, he's not imagining this as death. He's imagining this as some sort of continuation.
Luthen said that he was always there when he needed him. He said he's been out the rebellion more times than Michael Jordan's had retirement, but he's like, I got one more in me. The Force also guided him to Jeddah as well, and then he met Chirrut. In the end, he's decided to accept his fate. Andor was always going to go and steal the plans and then pass this message on to the others. They would then pass this message on themselves, and that would then allow the rebels to destroy the Death Star. It's something that was really hammered home for me when rewatching Rogue One for our breakdown. That Darth Vader scene was incredible, but there's also a thematic thing as well. We watch the soldiers desperately passing on the message, and then Vader comes and strikes them down one by one. However, the message keeps going, and even in their death, it still helps the future, which I feel very much represents Andor's fate in like the best Darth Vader action scene ever. Woo woo! Early in the season, you might also remember that Saw Gerrera, before the huffing gas, well, he touched upon how he'd never actually see the victory of the rebellion. Still, he fought on though. It very much reminded me of the ancient proverb, a society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they'll never sit. Though they knew they'd never experience the freedom from oppression, they still did it so that others could.
I burned my decency for someone else's future. I burned my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see.
And that's what I feel like this moment really hammers home. It sort of speaks to characters like, Andy Serkis in season 1, who, even though he knew he couldn't swim, he still helped others escape. It's all about sacrifice and doing what's best for the greater good. Though Andor dies in Rogue One, he's ushering in a brighter future for his child. Bix will experience this too, and it's fair to say both have been through the ringer. Andor's went from someone who's only been about his own goals, and he was driven by finding his sister. Though we can totally understand why this was, overall, it wasn't exactly changing the galaxy. He was focused on what he wanted and what was best for him and his family. But this ended up switching. There's also the choice he made with Bix, but she knew she had to choose for him. He was someone who could save so many lives, and she couldn't hold him back from helping others. She'd experienced the worst of the Empire, and if someone could free others from that, then she knew they had to do it. I absolutely loved that final shot, and being a parent, it really hit home for me. It added an extra weight to Andor and really highlighted what he was fighting for. I'm sure every parent out there will give up everything so that their child could have a better life. Andor could have had a happy life with Bix and his child, but everyone else would still be oppressed. Thus, Bix made that choice, and he had to go out and do what he did for the betterment of everyone. I feel like it's akin to characters like Tony Stark, who could have easily stayed with Pepper and Morgan. However, he went out and sacrificed himself so that others could have lived the life he could have had. It's an amazing message about self-sacrifice and resilience, and was the perfect shot to close the series on. I know Tony Gilroy said years before he already knew the final shot of Andor, long before they started making the season, and hearing that, I thought it would be something like, I don't know, Cassian walking down the street in Kafrene or going off to meet with Tivik. Sure, they do something similar with them flying off from Yavin 4, but this actual final shot means so much more. Andor is no longer the focus, and instead we look to the people who'll outlive him. They'll carry on everything he stood for, and it's a similar thing they did with Rogue One. We could have easily have ended that film on the beach, but even in all the characters' death, the film keeps going. We then watch that message get passed on to Leia, and know the characters didn't die in vain. The story keeps going, even without the group from Rogue One. And that's very much what I feel with this ending as well. I don't think anyone called Andor having a kid with Bix, but now it's happened, it doesn't feel like it could have gone any other way. Being honest, when they announced the show, I was like, well, we know what happens, but I'm sure the journey will still be good. This just elevates things though. It means so much more having Bix standing there smiling and knowing that she and her future are safe. That's what Andor died for, and it recontextualizes his final moments. It's the perfect way to close out the series, and I'm glad that this was the way they handled the story. Knowing the death was coming was always something that I thought made the season feel like it had a cloud raining over it. However, this shows that every cloud has a silver lining, and there's something even more positive to take from Cassian's death, which is brilliant. As we know, rebellions are built on hope, and Andor's ushered in a new time for this. We will talk about how we got there in just a bit, but did you know we've just launched these new Andor shirts on the merch store? Designed by our artist Sheridan, they're easily my favourite Star Wars shirts we've ever done. They come in double-sided versions as well. We also have our Thunderbolts Thundercats inspired one along with our Galactus Devourer of Worlds. It all goes towards helping videos like this get made, and huge thank you to everyone who's picked one up. Now, much of Andor is focused on the Senate, which has largely been ineffective against the Emperor. They had bugs planted to hear what they were saying, constant surveillance, but in the end, we saw how their words could even threaten the Emperor's goal of total rule, even if he is the Senate.
I am the Senate.
This need to shut down every conversation against him, that was something we saw in Andor Season 2 Episode 9. Mon Mothma's powerful speech was a threat to the propaganda that Gorman incited the violence. This would have made people start to question everything, and thus the House of Cards would start to fall apart. As we know, the Jedi have been massacred as well, and I think people would start to be like, why is everyone who seems to be good suddenly going crazy and starting riots and stuff? If the approved narrative was gone against, it then just threatens everything. If the Senate was swayed by Mothma, it would have risked the vital minerals that Project Stardust needed. Right up until the Death Star's completion, the Senate were a risk and thorn in the Emperor's side. We know from A New Hope that once the superweapon was completed, that the Senate was then dissolved. This was actually mentioned in the film.
The Imperial Senate will no longer be of any concern to us. The Emperor has dissolved the Council permanently.
From this point, each regional governor or Moff was then put in control. It's the final part of Palpatine's fascist plan for supreme rule of the galaxy. In building a weapon that could destroy entire planets in an instant, everyone will bend the knee. In the end though, he was undone by a farm boy who was the son of a man whose life helped get him in power. So lots of forcey-warsy stuff. What we're seeing with the dissolving of the Senate though is a plan Palpatine put in place since the Phantom Menace. The Emperor seized control originally by using a fallen Jedi and then all the political machinations. He lent on all the tools at the Senate's disposal and manipulated his way to control while playing both sides. Jar Jar gave the emergency powers to Palpatine, and this then led to Palpatine basically doing what he wanted. He went from mobilizing the clones to attack the Separatists to declaring himself Emperor in revenge of the Sith. Hold on a sec. Darth Jar Jar confirmed.
These are going to hurt you, sir.
By having an iron grip on the Senate and military along with the secret police, Palpatine could achieve his goals. As for his ultimate weapon, we learned that for a decade, Orson Krennic's been working on Project Stardust. This absolute power allowed the Emperor to direct his loyal minions to make a Death Star a reality. This takes things from the plans we saw at the end of Attack of the Clones to the destruction of Alderaan in A New Hope. Throughout the series, we've explored things like the prison labor camps that were used to make the dish, propaganda units manufacturing consent for Gorman's demise, and other departments working to make the Death Star real. However, throughout the show, even Luthen had no idea that Gorman's plans were for a superweapon. It wasn't until just before he was captured that everything was revealed to him. Lonnie divulged it all after admitting his cover was burned. Thus, Luthen took him out. However, Lonnie name dropped everything we end up seeing in Andor Rogue One. These are things like Urso, Jeddah, hitting the thumbs up, along with Scarif. Lonnie had just managed to get into Dedras' accounts and was able to get all the information, which we'll discuss more in just a bit. Though she located Luthen, this ends up screwing her worse than Cyril did. She's been breaking all the protocols and accessing information she shouldn't be privy to. With the fumble of Luthen's capture and her accessing things she shouldn't, it just makes her look like a spy. The very order that she vowed kept the universe safe from chaos has now crushed its fist down on her. In helping to build their power, she very much secures her own demise. She has been a loyal servant, even going as far as manipulating Cyril and aiding in genocides just to build Star Wars' version of the Manhattan Project. But in the end, just in the same way the characters who become the rebels, they don't get to see the victory, she also doesn't really get to enjoy any of the fruits of her labour. Everything's held back from her, and she ends up being interrogated by Krennic.
You haven't been talking to the cops, have you, mate?
You haven't been talking to the Jedi, have you, mate?
She's in the same position Cyril was in Season 1, and they reuse the interrogation booth from that. As we saw in Rogue One, there's also a lot of scrutiny on Krennic to get the Death Star working. It puts the pressure on him, and he of course wants to succeed in the eyes of the Emperor. Beyond this, we also had hints of the pressure of this in his conversation with Leo. Leo's totally sounds like Tarkin in the way he's talking, and even these figures, they're one wrong move away from ending up like Dedras. Or choked by Darth Vader in the boardroom. They'll end up dead. Rah. Speaks to how the Empire is willing to not only use people up, but they're also willing to use up planets. They strip the people and planets of their resources and then simply cast them to the side. In the end, he's essentially given the whiskey and the revolver, and we get the classic outside shot of people hearing that shot from the outside. It's an archetype in a lot of war movies, and it reminds me of a similar scene in Enemy at the Gates.
Perhaps you'd prefer to avoid the red tape.
He's come full circle in that final shot of him just before that final shot, as that's actually the way we saw him for the first time in season 1. It's also likely that Dedras is put in the same prison that Andor was in last season. I think that would be the most poetic thing, and it's sort of like poetry they rhyme. With the Death Star being complete, I also wonder if the goals of the prison have been altered. We know that Vader has a super Star Destroyer come Empire, which may be the next thing she works on. Palps will also soon be Amazon priming a second Death Star, so chop chop Dedra, lots of work to do. Now all of this happened because Lonnie managed to get the information out to Luthen. He stayed behind to finish the job, which in the end led to his death. However, just like Saw, he accepted this. Going back to the monologue in season 1, it was always clear he knew this was going to be the outcome. He stated how he already had decided to give up his life in totality for a future sunrise. Andor saw a sunrise, a scary one, while Bix looked out onto the sunset, which is brilliant writing. Both Luthen and Saw were also seen as agitators or anarchists by the Rebel Alliance. However, they were useful tools at the start. We saw how Luthen was increasingly a thorn in the side of the Rebel Alliance as Willman went onto missions for him. Saw's hitting of troop transports on Jeddah was also very frustrating for Mothma. Jeddah was as important to the Empire as Gorman was though. It's why in hindsight Saw's actions caused so much trouble, leading to a Star Destroyer over the city. As we know from Rogue One, they end up test firing on it, and they may have even chosen a different place had things gone differently. Even Darth Vader seemed mad they destroyed a holy city, so you could definitely see that as being maybe because of Saw. While a rebel, his attacks were deemed unsavory and he clashed with Mon Mothma like we saw in Rebels. The shot in the episode where Mothma speaks to him is also just like this. Mothma and Rebel Command were trying to do things the perceived right way. But like Luthen, had Saw not been the man he was, Galen Erso would not have sent his information to Saw. Both Saw and Luthen sacrificed themselves to get this info out to the Rebel Alliance. So they did the right thing, even though even in the Rebels, they're still like, you're too much of a rebel. While Mothma, Bail and the rest of the voting leaders did it and refused to do the dirty work, others did instead. Consistently in the last 3 episodes, Andor had to break all the protocols and go against the Alliance to actually get something done. Even in Rogue One, when they had all the info, the command wasted time before Andor and Ginger said fuck it and decided to go rogue. Rogue One! Both Bail and Mon Mothma were former senators as well, and just like the Senate, they sort of failed to do anything to stop the rise of tyranny. I'm not slagging them off yet if they're watching this video, but Senates, they used to talking things out, debating, using diplomacy, and in a war like this, you need something more than that. Had the pair not went full steam ahead, the Death Star's weakness would have not ever been known to the rebels, and thus they would have lost. It is kind of a harsh critique of politicians, but even in the New Republic era, they're completely inept and useless. They're useless, a lot of them. I guess at least Mon Mothma united most of the rebel groups though after her landmark speech, so maybe there was some good. As for Luthen, he could have got out with Mothma, but he knew he still had a job to do, which very much reflects Andor. Luthen remains behind as he still has a source in the ISB. While he was played like a damn fiddle with Gorman, he finally gets the information he needs. Lonnie gives him that, and then Luthen kills him after he tells him he's gonna take him to Yavin. Why Luthen did this is because, if Lonnie was caught, he might give up the info under torture and doom and damn all the rebels. It's just like Andor killing Tivik at the start of Rogue One. Both kill their informant as the information cannot get out. Now, a big question we don't really get an answer to is how Dedra found out about Luthen's shop. It's out the blue, but we can fall in like Luke in Empire when he falls down the... So Dedra says that she's always been walking past the shop and wanting to go in. This to me makes me think he's always been on her radar, but she's never had enough proof to go after him. It's kind of like how the FBI and CIA bug people's houses, but they then need more evidence to bury them. When Lonnie meets Luthen, he admits he's been burned and knows people are coming. He learned that Dedra was conducting an operation on Coruscant and needed to check if it was to arrest Luthen. This led to him going into her files, getting everything, and then passing that on to Luthen. Lonnie also said how he knew he wasn't followed there, as if he knew the truth about the energy program, then they wouldn't let him out the building. But, knowing how cunning the ISB were, they might have just let him go to follow him to see where he went to next. So far, they've only really met on that walkway. He also meets Luthen in public. Initially, this is because of how important the information is. However, it's also possible that he was being watched, or they already knew who his contact was, and just needed to confirm it. She reveals the Starpath unit which Luthen pretended to want to buy from Andor in Season 1. He then attempts to commit seppuku, but they have him rushed to the hospital. This reminded me a lot of the flying ambulance that the Traumatees use in Cyberpunk 2077. Then forces Kleya to go in and kill him, which is what he would have wanted. The secrets of the rebels are far too important. It's heartbreaking as we see her expert skills used to infiltrate the hospital and finally learn how she and Luthen met. He was a soldier whose comrades were committing atrocities. One even boasts of killing 50 people in a basement, and Luthen sees firsthand how much this war's made people into monsters. A stowaway on his ship's then found, and he's just had enough of these war crimes. Now, we never explicitly see what planet he's on. However, we know that the newly formed Empire committed countless massacres as a transition from the Old Republic to the Empire. The soldiers who come to speak to Luthen throughout the episode also wear a breathing device. It's the same one that Han and the soldiers have in Solo. It was a time of upheaval as well, as the Empire tried to maintain its control, whilst also expanding to take over the entire Rim. So Luthen may have even been an Old Republic soldier, and he's now being ordered to commit untold atrocities against civilian populations. You can also see that he's wearing the Imperial Army Trooper uniform, which makes me wonder if he indeed signed up just like how Han Solo did. He doesn't have the insolent expression that angers superior officers though. Then again, that's no smug look of superiority. This is what I look like when I tell people Andor's my favourite Star Wars, a signature look of superiority. Imperial troopers were also originally sourced from planetary defense units before conscription, so he might have well been a holdover from a more civilized age. Kind of like how the Wehrmacht in Germany was increasingly asked to commit wars of aggression as Germany transitioned into Nazi Germany. We know Onderan was occupied with resistance led by Saw, which then had to counter it. The soldiers also mentioned flamers, and these were used on the planet which we saw in the Bad Batch. But it's all unconfirmed, however, if you look into the expanded lore, you can sort of piece it together. We then see her story as he takes her across the galaxy and goes to a planet that might be Naboo. Now, it's actually a big theory in Season 1 that Kleya was actually Andor's sister. Andor, looking for her, took a big back seat as he stumbled across groups that wished to take down the Empire. He left his sister behind in Season 1 and went to look for her on Milana 1, which started this massive chain of events. However, he was told by his adoptive mother to stop searching as the planet had no survivors. Which may have been the case, however, it does feel like another thing you kind of have to piece together yourself. Kind of like the whole thing with Dedras. Symbolically though, maybe him not wanting to go be with her, focus on the rebellion, you could also kind of apply that to sort of what happens with Bix. So it just very much speaks to the character and is kind of this repeating motif. Maybe she is his sister, but maybe not, but it doesn't matter either way, you know, you don't need conclusions to these answers to understand the character. Either way, back to the main point with the planet, that was used for mining and may have been mined to destruction, just like the fate that awaits Gorman. Luthen's comrades could have been sent there to pacify the local populations to make sure the last remnants of mining could be done. However, we may not know exactly where she came from. Luthen does have a logo on his hip flask, but we were unable to recognize this, so if you know, comments below. His defection though was of course a massive piece, and it shows how rebellions are made up from people from inside and out. Now, going to Yavin 4 in the end, Andor's incredulous at the leaders dismissing Luthen's plans. Pamlo, girl, what have you done? I love how they brought all the actors back though, and it was amazing jumping from this directly to Rogue One. Even Admiral Raddus is there.
It's Luke and Obi-Wan. And my favorite, Chewie, they're all here!
Bail Organa, yep, this is definitely him, it was him the whole time. Luckily, Mon Mothma gets her cousin Vel to speak to Andor and verify the info. Andor is then sent on the path to his death. He's told about Tivik wanting to only meet him, which is who he then goes to see on the Ring of Kafrene. So the show ends minutes before the start of Rogue One. That movie then ends just before the events of A New Hope. It's crazy that the two best Star Wars properties since the original trilogy were basically born out of a few lines in A New Hope's opening crawl. Getting to know these characters as well also impacts the series so much. Andor, of course, dies on Scarif while Bail dies on Alderaan. In the end, both were victims of the Death Star superweapon, and it's haunting watching this back. Also love how he decides to water the plants. He thinks he might return, but really, probably deep down knows it's over. Going past the group out jogging, these are the same troops that go to Scarif at the end of Rogue One. Tried looking out for my boy Rizzle, but couldn't see him, but yeah, same team. Melshi is also a big part of this too, and a key cog in getting the plans. Having escaped the prison with Andor, he then went off to join the rebels on Yavin 4. He'll go on to lead the ground team at Scarif and is a tiny piece in the puzzle of Rogue One. He too helped to build the Death Star, so it's a nice full circle moment for the character. In the end, we see Willman, who finally gets to live happily ever after. To a point anyway, with his Gorman chick. My guy finally won there. We also cut back to Mon's husband. He's flying around Coruscant with a bottle of Henny and also a side chick. But she looks remarkably like Mon Mothma, albeit a bit younger. Depression is in the air though. Her daughter's now married as well, but we don't really know any of their fate in the future. We also have Kleya waking up. She didn't want to go to Yavin and was very much of the same opinion as Luthen when it came to the rebellion. So potentially she even ended up leaving. Prequels to legendary properties, they always kind of come with this problem. Like if they introduce major characters, where were they in the original trilogy? Side note, the biggest one for me was where was Ahsoka during the original trilogy? I know it's almost certain she was training Sabine Wren during the time, but it's a bit weird, especially because Filoni's mapped out every single minute of her life so far, except for those movies. In the end though, we can only guess that Kleya and Vel assist the Rebel Alliance, but they're not tied up with the Skywalkers. We still also have the Battle of Yavin and everything up until the Battle of Endor, not to mention the subsequent uprisings and Battle of Jakku until the truce takes place. Lastly, Bix and her child are also brand new. As discussed earlier though, it shows the future Andor was fighting for. She's on Mina Rao, and even our boy B2EMO has his own side chick, which is a little yellow droid. Not side chick, it's his main chick. As for Bix though, after the trauma and loss, she has her child, safety and kinship. Looking out at the sun, she smiles and it hammers home that message of hope. It reminds me of Luke looking out on the twin sunsets of Tatooine in A New Hope. There he wanted to escape the planet like a pop punk band wants to escape their hometown. But here, Bix is content, apart from not having the love of her life as he's about to get nuked. But we can't have everything, can we? But at least the girl is gonna be okay. Life's a Bix and then you die. It is a happy ending though, and though it's very bittersweet because we know what happens with Andor, we can at least take solace in the fact that his child and Bix are safe, which is a very important message. And in the end, that's what wars are fighting for. Soldiers go off to make other people like this have a better life than they will. It's just a lot of touches upon sacrifice, getting emotional, but it's just been VE Day. I've been thinking about a lot of stuff like that, and very important message and a very poignant note to end on. So, great job, guys. Take me to the review. Now, as for my thoughts on the season, Tony motherfucking best Star Wars Gilroy, he's done it again and crafted what may be up there as the second best trilogy in Star Wars. Counting season 1 and 2 along with Rogue One, this is an incredible tale of what it takes to make a rebellion. Though I do think some of it was slow and drawn out, this was done to tell us a really effective story of how it's normally never one inciting moment that kicks off a resistance movement. Normally people are chipped away at and oppressed bit by bit, and this then becomes like the snowflake that starts off an avalanche. That's what the show's managed to capture perfectly, and it's demonstrated with a number of characters. Whether it's Bix having her life torn apart, almost being violated, or the massacre at Gorman, there's several things that it takes to make a movement like the Rebellion. Despite what Twitter might say, Star Wars has always been political, but I think this is probably the project that's dealt with it the best. Giving a universal message about rising against oppression, it's something I think a lot of people will be able to see some semblance of similarity with. Narratives like this are common in a lot of political dramas, but Andor succeeds in showing us how our characters deal with that. We already know where the show is going to go, and thus the end destination's already set in stone, which can often make prequel stories feel like a chore. However, the nuance, characterizations and performances really were what made this show gripping. The end destination doesn't really matter, and this show instead explores what led to it. Production wise as well, the series is on another level. They used all that budget and brought in a living, breathing Star Wars world. Now I am gushing over this, but I know it isn't for everyone. Throughout its release, I'm sure you've seen conversations centered around whether sexual assault should be in Star Wars, the pace, lack of lightsabers, and general tone. So here's where I am with that. I can totally see that assault thing being out of place, and I actually had it spoiled for me, and even said, to me it would be like doing the same thing in Lord of the Rings. That world has a tone, standards, and so on, and I wasn't exactly sure how I would feel about it in Star Wars. Upon watching it though, it makes sense, and it felt like it was necessary to show how far the people were being pushed. I don't think Bix lives in a vacuum, and this will likely have happened across a number of planets. Again, it's just a moment that adds to the great pile in which people finally hit a point that they've had enough. We've also had things like clear plays on the French Revolution, massacres, guerrilla tactics, and so on and so forth. And most importantly, the show perfectly ties in with Rogue One while also leaving dangling threads for other stories they could travel. Even if they don't know, I can't think of a better way to close out Andor's story and legacy. Star Wars is in a really weird place right now where general audiences just seem to be checked out. I think if we had projects like Andor constantly being fed to us, that lack of interest simply wouldn't be there. Like, imagine this dropped in 2020. This is truly prestige television and probably the best thing Disney's put out since taking over the reins. Gilroy probably locked at least the top 2 spots there as well, because watching this also improves Rogue One, and it was great in the first place. So yeah, though I think that some people might struggle with the tone, the pace, and even the shades of grey with the characters, because not many people are that likable in it, I think this will be something that people go back to. Though the audience is low for the series, I think at some point that people will probably come back to this more than once. And then years down the line, you know, when the kids now who watch Star Wars, they grow up, they'll be like, I heard Andor was I don't know why they're talking like that. I heard Andor was really good, I'm gonna go watch it. I would much rather rewatch something like this than some of the other shit they've put out recently. So yeah, maybe Disney completely destroyed the brand, put out utter garbage, and destroyed everything. But just like Andor himself, it wasn't all for nothing. There was some hope and good that came from it. And I feel like maybe it was worth sitting through all the other absolute crap if we got this. Put that on the poster. It was worth sitting through everything else if we got this. So yeah, excellent series. I don't know how quickly I'll return to Star Wars in future when stuff's released. Like, I haven't seen a lot of the stuff they've dropped. I didn't even finish Skeleton Crew, but if they can make a number of projects like this, then I'll always make time to check them out. Like Skeleton Crew, I didn't even think it was that bad, but you know, when you're just not gripped by something, you forget to watch it the next week, and then before you know it, this whole series is over, and it's like, oh well, just can't be bothered to go back and watch it. But didn't have that with Andor, so I really can't recommend it any higher, and I hope you guys have also enjoyed watching the video. Huge apology if you're from Skeleton Crew as well. I didn't mean to hit you with a stray there, and huge apologies as well for not covering this show every week. Unfortunately, they dropped 3 hours worth a week, which was just too much for us to take on board. I think our Last of Us scripts alone are like 8 to 10,000 words, and then we have to, of course, shoot and edit it. Then we have the weekly classic movie breakdowns, you know, Thunderball, that's an hour and 40 minutes long on just that film alone, and that's not, videos like that are normally like 20,000 words. Then we cover things like Thunderbolts and then Sinners on top of it. So it's almost like 2 to 3 dissertations a week content-wise, and coupling that with how much we'd have to do with Andor, we just didn't have the manpower at the team. So I apologize for that, but I hope you've enjoyed this video. We also have a Rogue One breakdown that's out for members, and will be coming out shortly for non-members as well. If you want to become a member, it costs just 99 cents a month, and we've tried to set it where hopefully it's not a lot to you, but if a lot of you do it, it will mean a lot to us. Again, our merch store is right below the video, and yeah, if you want something else to watch, then video on screen right now. With that out of the way though, thank you for watching this one. I've been your host Paul. May the Force be with you, and also with you.